The fluorescent lights of Memorial Hospital's emergency room buzzed overhead as Dr. Elijah Carter rubbed his tired eyes. His wristwatch showed 11:37 p.m., just 23 minutes before his 12-hour shift would finally end. He'd been on his feet since noon, treating everything from a child's broken arm to an elderly man's heart attack. The night had settled into that strange quiet that sometimes fell over emergency rooms. Not peaceful, but a temporary lull in the storm. Elijah took a sip of his lukewarm coffee, grimacing at the bitter taste. 3 months at Memorial and he still hadn't found decent coffee in the hospital. He'd moved to the city after leaving his position at University Medical Center in Philadelphia, where he'd spent 7 years building his reputation as a specialist in high-risk pregnancies. Most people thought he was crazy for leaving such a prestigious hospital, but Elijah had his reasons he kept to himself. "You heading out soon, Doc?" asked Nurse Tanya Wilson, glancing up from her computer at the nurse's station. "That's the plan," Elijah replied with a tired smile. "Unless something exciting happens in the next 20 minutes. The words had barely left his mouth when the emergency doors burst open. 2 paramedics rushed in, pushing a gurney with a woman lying motionless on it. Her face was puffy, her skin ashen despite her dark complexion, and her pregnant belly protruded prominently under the thin blanket. "What do we have?" Elijah asked, immediately moving toward the incoming patient. His fatigue forgotten, 34-year-old female, approximately 32 weeks pregnant. The first paramedic reported, breathing heavily, found unconscious at a private event. Blood pressure 190/110. No ID on her. No family or friends came with her. Elijah's mind quickly processed the information as they wheeled her into treatment room 1. High blood pressure, unconscious 3rd trimester, the classic signs of severe preeclampsia, a dangerous pregnancy complication that could kill both mother and baby if not treated immediately. "I need a full obstetric team here now," he called out, his voice calm but commanding. "Get ultrasound, start magnesium sulfate, and call Dr. Lee from OB." The room sprang to life as nurses and technicians responded to his orders. Elijah leaned over the woman, shining a light into her eyes to check pupil response. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open. "Can you hear me?" he asked, watching for any reaction. "If you can hear me, try to squeeze my hand." There was no response. The fetal monitor technician rushed in, quickly setting up equipment to check on the baby's heart rate. Elijah noticed the woman wasn't wearing a wedding ring, though there was a lighter band of skin suggesting she normally wore one. "Baby's heart rate is a 165, the technician announced. "Higher than normal." "The baby's stressed," Elijah said, now examining the woman's swollen ankles and hands. "Classic preeclampsia. We need to get her stabilized before we can even think about delivery." Dr. Helen Lee, the on-call obstetrician, rushed in, still tying her surgical mask. "What's the situation?" Elijah quickly brought her up to speed as a nurse hooked up an IV line. "Severe preeclampsia. BP dangerously high, patient unresponsive. No identification yet. I've started magnesium sulfate and ordered blood work." Dr. Lee nodded, immediately examining the patient herself. "Good call. Let's get some protein tests to confirm and check liver and kidney function." "Already ordered," Elijah replied. "I'm also concerned about possible HELLP syndrome." He was referring to a rare but life-threatening variation of preeclampsia involving liver damage and low platelet count. As they worked, Nurse Tanya approached with a clipboard. "Still no ID. Security is checking with the event organizers where she was found. Should we post her photo internally to see if any staff recognizes her?" "Let's hold off on that," Elijah said, focused on the readings from the monitors. "Priority is stabilizing her condition. Someone will come looking for her soon enough." The woman suddenly seized, her body going rigid before convulsing violently. "She's eclamptic," Elijah called out. 5 milligrams of diazepam now." The next few minutes were a blur of activity as they worked to control the seizure. Elijah stayed remarkably calm, his hands steady as he administered medication and monitored the patient's vitals. When the seizure finally subsided, everyone in the room seemed to exhale at once. "We need to monitor her brain activity," Elijah said, wiping sweat from his brow. "And get that ultrasound going. I need to see how the baby's doing." The ultrasound technician squeezed gel onto the woman's belly and moved the wand across it. The image on the screen showed a fully formed baby moving slightly. "Amniotic fluid looks good," Elijah observed. "No obvious placental abruption. That's something, at least." Dr. Lee nodded in agreement. If we can get her blood pressure under control, we might avoid an emergency C-section. Let's hope so, Elijah said. 32 weeks is viable, but every day in the womb improves the baby's chances. The blood work results came back, confirming their suspicions. Elevated liver enzymes, low platelets, and high protein in the urine, all indicators of severe preeclampsia with features of HELLP syndrome. We need to admit her to the ICU, Elijah decided. Continue magnesium sulfate, start labetalol for the blood pressure, and constant fetal monitoring. As they prepared to move the patient, Elijah noticed his shift had ended almost an hour ago. The thought of leaving didn't even cross his mind. I'm staying with her, he told Dr. Lee. At least until she's stable. Dr. Lee gave him an appreciative nod. I'll call my team and let them know we might need to deliver tonight if things don't improve. As they wheeled the woman toward the elevator to the ICU, one of the night shift nurses hurried over with a curious expression. Hey, is it true? She asked in a hushed voice. Someone said the patient is somebody important. Elijah frowned. Important how? The nurse shrugged. I don't know. Just heard some talk. Everyone who comes through those doors is important, Elijah replied firmly. Let's focus on medicine, not gossip. The nurse looked properly chastised and hurried away. Elijah had seen how differently some doctors treated VIP patients, sometimes with excessive caution that actually led to worse care. He had always found the practice distasteful. Medicine shouldn't change based on someone's social status. In the ICU, they settled the woman into a room filled with monitoring equipment. Elijah checked each line, each medication dosage twice. He'd seen too many women, especially women of color like this patient, have their symptoms dismissed or undertreated. Statistics showed Black women were 3 to 4 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related complications. It was one of the reasons he'd specialized in high-risk obstetrics. Dr. Carter, a voice called from the doorway. It was the hospital administrator, looking unusually concerned for 1 a.m. Can I have a word? Elijah stepped outside the room. I'm a bit busy. I understand, but there's a situation. The patient, do you know who she is? No identification yet, Elijah said. Does it matter? The administrator looked uncomfortable. Well, there are rumors she might be someone notable. The press might get involved. Unless you have medical information relevant to her care, I'm not interested. Elijah replied flatly. And I'd appreciate if you discourage that kind of speculation among the staff. Returning to his patient, Elijah checked the monitors again. The medication seemed to be working. Her blood pressure had dropped to 160/95, still high, but moving in the right direction. The baby's heart rate had stabilized too. Around 3 a.m., the woman's eyelids fluttered open. She looked disoriented, her gaze wandering around the room before settling on Elijah. Where? She whispered, her voice barely audible. You're at Memorial Hospital, Elijah explained gently. You're pregnant and you have a condition called preeclampsia. We're giving you medication to bring your blood pressure down and protect your baby. Fear flickered across her face as her hand moved to her belly. The baby is stable, Elijah reassured her. Can you tell me your name? Christina, she whispered. Christina, Elijah repeated with a small smile. Good. Do you know what happened before you came here? She shook her head slightly, then winced as if the movement hurt. That's okay. It's normal to be confused. Is there someone we should call for you? Her eyes filled with tears. My husband, I'm James. We'll find him, Elijah promised. Do you have his number? But Christina's eyes had already closed again, the brief moment of consciousness passing. Elijah made a note of the name and asked a nurse to try to locate a James who might be looking for his pregnant wife, named Christina. Throughout the night, Elijah monitored Christina's condition closely. By 5 a.m., her blood pressure had stabilized at 145/90, still elevated but no longer immediately life-threatening. The protein levels in her urine remained high, but her kidney function tests showed improvement. Most importantly, the baby continued to show normal heart patterns. As dawn broke, casting a golden glow through the ICU windows, Elijah realized he'd been awake for nearly 24 hours. His scrubs were wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot, but there was a quiet satisfaction in knowing both mother and child were stable for now. You should get some rest, Dr. Lee told him when she came to check on the patient at 6 a.m. You've done everything possible. Elijah nodded tiredly. I'll just finish my notes and head out. Call me if anything changes. He sat at the nurse's station, carefully documenting the night's events when he heard a commotion near the ICU entrance. Looking up, he saw several men in suits, one of them arguing intensely with the security guard. Little did Elijah know that his ordinary night shift was about to become anything but ordinary, and that the woman whose life he had just saved would change the course of his career forever. Elijah rubbed his burning eyes and stood up from the nurse's station. The commotion at the ICU entrance was growing louder. A tall man in an expensive-looking suit was gesturing frantically while security tried to calm him down. Something about the man's desperate expression made Elijah walk over. "Is there a problem?" he asked, his voice raspy from exhaustion. The security guard turned. "This gentleman insists on seeing a patient, but visiting hours don't start until 8, and he won't tell us which patient he's here for." The well-dressed man stepped forward. "My wife is here. She's pregnant. She collapsed last night, and I've been searching everywhere for her." "Your name, sir?" Elijah asked. "James Wilson," the man replied, his eyes red-rimmed from what looked like a sleepless night. "My wife is Christina Wilson." Elijah felt a jolt of recognition. "Christina is your wife? She's been asking for you. She's stable now, but we've been trying to locate family since she arrived." Relief washed over James's face. "Thank God. Can I see her?" "Follow me," Elijah said, leading him past the security desk. As they walked, he noticed the other men in suits hanging back, maintaining a respectful distance but watching vigilantly. There was something odd about their behavior, but Elijah was too tired to give it much thought. "I'm Dr. Carter," he said. "I was in the emergency department when your wife was brought in. Can you tell me what happened? It might help us with her treatment." James ran a hand through his disheveled hair. "We were at a private fundraiser. Christina wasn't feeling well, said she had a headache, but insisted on attending. During dinner, she excused herself to use the restroom and never came back. A staff member found her collapsed in the hallway." His voice cracked. "By the time I was notified, the ambulance had already taken her. I've been going from hospital to hospital all night." Elijah nodded. "She has severe preeclampsia, a dangerous condition in pregnancy that causes high blood pressure and can damage organs. We've managed to stabilize her, but she's not out of the woods yet." They reached Christina's room, and James rushed to her bedside, taking her hand gently. Her eyes fluttered open at his touch. "James," she whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "I'm here, Chrissy," he said, kissing her forehead. "I'm here now." Elijah checked the monitors, noting that Christina's blood pressure had risen slightly since James's arrival, not unusual given the emotional moment. "Try to keep her calm," he advised. "Stress can raise her blood pressure." James nodded, pulling a chair close to the bed and sitting down without letting go of his wife's hand. Elijah performed a quick examination, checking Christina's pupils and reflexes. "The baby?" James asked anxiously. "Stable for now," Elijah answered. "The heart rate is normal, and the ultrasound didn't show any problems with the placenta or amniotic fluid. But we need to monitor both of them closely." A nurse appeared at the doorway. "Dr. Carter, Dr. Lee wants to discuss the treatment plan." "I'll be right back," Elijah told the couple, stepping out to speak with Dr. Lee, who was waiting at the nurse's station. "How's our patient?" Dr. Lee asked, slightly more responsive. "The husband arrived. He's with her now." Dr. Lee lowered her voice. "Do you know who they are?" Elijah frowned. "The patient's name is Christina Wilson. Her husband is James. Why?" "James Wilson, as in Mayor Wilson?" Dr. Lee raised her eyebrows meaningfully. Elijah blinked in surprise. "The mayor? Are you sure? Unless there's another James Wilson who travels with security personnel." "Yes." Dr. Lee nodded toward the waiting area where the suited men were standing, occasionally speaking into their earpieces. Elijah glanced back at the room. Now he understood the commotion and the hospital administrator's strange behavior earlier. But the information changed nothing about his approach to Christina's care. "Well, she's still a patient with severe preeclampsia, regardless of who her husband is," he said firmly. "What's our plan?" Dr. Lee smiled slightly, as if appreciating his attitude. "I agree. I think we should continue the current treatment. Magnesium sulfate to prevent seizures, antihypertensives for her blood pressure, and constant monitoring. If her condition doesn't improve in the next 12 hours, we should consider delivering the baby." At 32 weeks, the baby has a good chance, but every day makes a difference, Elijah noted. If we can keep her stable for even a few more days, it could significantly improve the outcome. That's the goal, Dr. Lee agreed. But the mother's health comes first. If her liver enzymes rise or her platelets drop further, we deliver immediately. Agreed. They walked back to Christina's room together. James looked up as they entered, his hand still holding his wife's. Christina had fallen asleep again, her breathing deep and even. Mr. Wilson, Dr. Lee said. I'm Dr. Lee, the obstetrics specialist. Dr. Carter has been taking excellent care of your wife. James stood up, extending his hand. Thank you both. Christina means everything to me. Dr. Lee explained the treatment plan to James while Elijah checked the latest lab results on the computer. The numbers were concerning but not alarming, a delicate balance they needed to maintain. I've cleared my schedule to stay with your wife today, Dr. Lee told James. And Dr. Carter has been here all night, far beyond his shift. James turned to Elijah with genuine gratitude in his eyes. You stayed with her all night? It's my job, Elijah said simply. Any doctor would have done the same. But they both knew that wasn't entirely true. Many doctors would have handed off the case at the end of their shift, especially not knowing the patient was connected to someone influential. You should get some rest, Dr. Lee told Elijah. You've been on your feet for over 24 hours. Elijah nodded reluctantly. He was running on fumes, and fatigue could lead to mistakes. Call me if anything changes, he said. I'll be back tonight. As he walked toward the doctor's lounge to gather his things, the hospital administrator intercepted him. Dr. Carter, she said in a hushed voice, why didn't you tell me we had the mayor's wife in our care? Because I didn't know, Elijah replied honestly. And it wouldn't have changed her treatment if I had. The administrator looked flustered. Well, we need to make sure she receives the very best care. She is receiving the very best care, Elijah interrupted, his exhaustion making him less diplomatic than usual. The same care every patient in this hospital deserves. He walked away before the administrator could respond, too tired to engage in a conversation about VIP treatment. In the lounge, he changed out of his scrubs and gathered his belongings. His body ached for sleep, but his mind was still racing, reviewing Christina's case, wondering if he'd missed anything. On his way out, he passed Christina's room one last time. Through the window, he could see James sitting beside her bed, his head bowed as if in prayer. One of the security men nodded respectfully to Elijah as he passed. Outside, the morning sun was blinding after the dim hospital lighting. Elijah squinted as he walked to his car, the events of the night replaying in his mind. He'd treated dozens of preeclampsia cases over the years, but something about this one felt different. Maybe it was the coincidence of treating the mayor's wife without knowing it. Or maybe it was the way Christina had briefly gripped his hand when she first regained consciousness. A moment of human connection amid the clinical chaos. Elijah drove home on autopilot. The streets of the city quiet in the early morning hours. His apartment was small but neat, with large windows that he now darkened with blackout curtains. He set his alarm for 6 hours later, knowing he needed to be back at the hospital by then. As he drifted off to sleep, his last thoughts were of Christina's lab values and medication dosages, his doctor's mind still working even as his body surrendered to exhaustion. He woke to his phone ringing. Disoriented, he fumbled for it, noticing he'd only been asleep for 4 hours. Dr. Carter, he answered, his voice thick with sleep. It's Dr. Lee. You need to come back. Christina Wilson's condition has deteriorated. Elijah was instantly alert. What happened? Her blood pressure spiked suddenly and her liver enzymes are through the roof. We're preparing for an emergency C-section. I'm on my way, he said, already getting out of bed. The drive back to the hospital was a blur. Elijah's mind raced through possible complications and interventions, the fog of fatigue pushed aside by adrenaline. When he arrived at the hospital, he ran through the corridors, ignoring curious glances from staff who weren't used to seeing the usually composed Dr. Carter in such a hurry. At the operating room, he found Dr. Lee already scrubbed in, the team preparing for surgery. Through the window, he could see Christina being positioned on the table, her face pale behind the oxygen mask. Mayor Wilson was nowhere to be seen, probably waiting anxiously outside. What do we know? Elijah asked as he began scrubbing his hands. Her liver enzymes tripled in 2 hours, Dr. Lee replied. Blood pressure shot up to 210/120, despite maximum medication. We don't have a choice, we need to deliver now. Elijah nodded grimly. Let's do this. As he entered the operating room, Christina's eyes found his, wide with fear. Elijah moved to her side, leaning down so she could hear him over the bustle of the surgical team. We're going to take good care of you and your B. Bye, he promised. Just hang on. What happened next would test every bit of skill and experience Elijah had accumulated throughout his career. In a race against time to save 2 lives hanging in the balance. The operating room hummed with urgent activity as nurses and technicians moved with practiced efficiency. Elijah stood at Christina's side while the anesthesiologist administered the spinal block. Her trembling hand reached for his and he squeezed it reassuringly. I'm scared, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the beeping monitors. That's normal, Elijah said gently. But you're in good hands. Dr. Lee is one of the best surgeons I've ever worked with. Dr. Lee, already positioned at Christina's abdomen, nodded appreciatively at the compliment. We're going to move quickly, she explained to Christina. You'll feel some pressure but no pain. Dr. Carter will be right here with you the whole time. As the anesthesiologist signaled that the spinal block had taken effect, Dr. Lee began the procedure. Elijah stayed near Christina's head, monitoring her vitals and offering quiet reassurance. He noticed her wedding ring was back on her finger. James must have brought it. How's James? Christina asked, her words slightly slurred from the medication. Worried about you, Elijah replied honestly. But he's just outside. He'll be able to see the baby right after delivery. A nurse wiped sweat from Dr. Lee's brow as she worked with focused intensity. Uterine incision complete, she announced. There's more bleeding than I'd like. Elijah watched the monitors carefully. Christina's blood pressure was dangerously high despite the medication, and her oxygen levels were beginning to drop. Oxygen saturation falling to 92%, he reported. Let's increase oxygen flow. A nurse adjusted the oxygen mask over Christina's face, her eyes wide with fear fixed on Elijah's. It's okay, he assured her, though concern gnawed at his stomach. Just keep breathing normally. I see the baby, Dr. Lee said. Small, but that's expected at 32 weeks. Get the NICU team ready. The neonatal intensive care unit team stood prepared at the warming station across the room. Elijah glanced at them, then back at the monitors. Christina's heartbeat had become irregular, and her blood pressure was still climbing despite maximum medication. BP 220 over 130, a nurse called out. Pulse 120 and irregular. She's developing pulmonary edema, Elijah said, hearing the characteristic crackling sounds in her lungs. We need to watch for heart failure. Dr. Lee worked quickly, her hands steady despite the increasing tension in the room. Almost there, she said. Just a few more seconds. Christina's grip on Elijah's hand tightened suddenly. Can't breathe, she gasped. Alarm shot through Elijah as he saw her oxygen levels plummet. Oxygen down to 85%. She's decompensating. Baby's out, Dr. Lee announced, lifting a tiny bluish infant from Christina's abdomen. The room held its breath until a thin cry pierced the tense silence. The NICU team immediately took the baby to assess and stabilize it, but there was no time for relief. Christina's monitors were blaring warnings as her condition rapidly deteriorated. She's crashing, Elijah said, moving quickly to the head of the bed. Let's intubate now. As Dr. Lee completed the delivery of the placenta and began closing the incision, Elijah and the anesthesiologist worked to secure Christina's airway. Her body had gone limp, her face ashen beneath the oxygen mask. Starting magnesium bolus, a nurse called out, hanging a new IV bag. Not responding to standard doses, Elijah said grimly, let's prepare for ECMO if her condition doesn't improve in the next few minutes. ECMO, extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, was a last resort, essentially an artificial lung to support patients when their own lungs failed. Outside in the waiting area, James paced anxiously, unaware of the battle for his wife's life taking place behind the operating room doors. One of his security personnel approached with a tiny cup of coffee, which he accepted automatically but didn't drink. Back in the operating room, the team worked frantically to stabilize Christina. Her heart had begun to respond to medication, but her lungs were filling with fluid, a dangerous complication of preeclampsia called pulmonary edema. Let's add furosemide, Elijah ordered, naming a powerful diuretic to help remove the excess fluid. And I want an echocardiogram to check heart function. Dr. Lee finished the surgery. Her gloves and gown splattered with more blood than usual for a C-section. Uterus is contracting well, but she's lost a lot of blood. I'm concerned about DIC. Disseminated intravascular coagulation was a severe clotting disorder that could cause uncontrollable bleeding. Already sent the labs, Elijah confirmed. We'll know soon. For the next hour, they fought to stabilize Christina, adding medications, adjusting ventilator settings, and constantly monitoring her fragile condition. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, she began to improve. Her oxygen levels crept up, her heart rhythm steadied, and her blood pressure, while still elevated, stopped its dangerous climb. I think we're turning a corner, Elijah said finally, his scrubs soaked with sweat from the intensity of the past hour. He looked toward the corner of the room where the neonatologist was finishing her assessment of the baby. How's the little one? He called out. The neonatologist looked up. 3 pounds 4 ounces, breathing on her own with just a little oxygen support. Good heart rate and color. She's doing remarkably well for 32 weeks. A wave of relief washed over Elijah. At least the baby was stable. Now they needed to focus on getting Christina through the next critical 24 hours. Let's move her to ICU, he decided, and someone needs to update the mayor. Dr. Lee nodded. I'll talk to him. You stay with Christina. As they prepared to transfer Christina to the intensive care unit, Elijah checked each connection, each medication pump, making sure nothing would be disrupted during the move. Though still unconscious and on a ventilator, Christina's color had improved slightly and her vital signs had stabilized enough for transport. Ready? He asked the team. At their nods, they carefully rolled Christina's bed out of the operating room and toward the ICU. In the hallway, they passed James, who stood with Dr. Lee. His face was a mask of controlled anguish as he caught sight of his wife, pale and intubated. Being wheeled past, Christina, he whispered, reaching out a hand but not touching her. Elijah paused briefly. She's stable for now, Mr. Mayor. The next 24 hours will be critical. James nodded, seemingly unable to speak. Dr. Lee placed a comforting hand on his arm. Your daughter is doing well. The neonatologist will take you to see her once we've got Christina settled. A flicker of joy broke through James's worried expression. Daughter? We have a daughter? Yes, Dr. Lee confirmed with a small smile. A fighter just like her mother. They continued to the ICU where a team was waiting to receive Christina. Elijah gave detailed handoff instructions, explaining every medication, every concern, every potential complication to watch for. I'll be staying, he told the ICU nurse, who raised her eyebrows in surprise. Dr. Carter, you've been here for over 30 hours straight, she pointed out. You need rest. I'll rest when she's stable, he replied, pulling up a chair next to Christina's bed. The truth was, Elijah wasn't sure why he felt so invested in this particular patient. Maybe it was because he had been there from the beginning, or maybe it was the look of trust in her eyes when she'd gripped his hand in the operating room. Whatever the reason, he couldn't bring himself to leave. An hour later, James entered the ICU, his face transformed. Despite the worry that still creased his forehead, there was wonder in his eyes. I just held her, he said quietly to Elijah. Our daughter. She's so tiny but so perfect. Elijah smiled, genuinely happy for the new father. Congratulations, Mr. Mayor. Please call me James, he insisted, taking a seat on the other side of Christina's bed. After what you've done for my family, I think we're well past formalities. They sat in companionable silence for a while, both watching the steady rise and fall of Christina's chest, controlled by the ventilator. The machines beeped rhythmically, a technological lullaby confirming she was still fighting. The press is going crazy outside, James said eventually. Someone leaked that Christina was here. They don't know about the baby yet. Elijah frowned. I'm sorry about that. Patient confidentiality is taken seriously here. James waved off the concern. It's not your fault. Being in the public eye means privacy is always a battle. He looked directly at Elijah. Dr. Lee told me how you stayed with Christina all night when she first came in, even though your shift was over, and how you came back immediately when her condition worsened. Elijah shrugged. I was just doing my job. No, James said firmly. You went above and beyond. Most doctors would have handed her off to the next shift without a second thought. You saved her life. You saved both their lives. Before Elijah could respond, one of the monitors began to alarm. Christina's blood pressure was rising again despite the medication. "She's still fighting," Elijah said, standing to check the monitors. "But so are we." As night fell over the hospital, the critical dance continued. Medication adjustments, constant monitoring, and the shared vigil of a doctor who wouldn't give up and a husband who wouldn't leave his wife's side. Beyond the hospital walls, reporters gathered, waiting for news about the mayor's wife. But inside room 4 of the ICU, there were no titles or headlines, just 3 people connected by circumstance and the fragile thread of survival. Morning light filtered through the blinds of the ICU room, casting thin golden stripes across Christina's bed. Elijah blinked awake, his neck stiff from sleeping in the chair. For a moment he was disoriented, then the steady beeping of monitors brought him back to reality. He straightened, checking the readouts automatically. To his surprise, Christina's numbers looked better. Much better. Her blood pressure had finally responded to the medication, dropping to 145/90. Still high, but no longer in the danger zone. Her oxygen levels had improved enough that the respiratory therapist had been able to reduce the ventilator settings overnight. James was gone, probably visiting their daughter in the NICU. Elijah stood and stretched, his body protesting after nearly 48 hours with minimal rest. He checked his phone and found several missed calls from Dr. Lee and the hospital administrator. A nurse entered, smiling when she saw him. "You're still here?" "I thought you might have finally gone home when the mayor left." "Just caught a quick nap," Elijah admitted. "How long was I out?" "About 3 hours. The mayor went to see the baby around 5 a.m. and said not to wake you unless something changed." She began checking Christina's IVs and recording vitals. Her labs came back looking better. Liver enzymes are trending down and platelets are coming up. Elijah nodded, relief washing over him. "That's very good news. Any change in neurological status?" The neurologist was by earlier. No signs of stroke or permanent damage. They're cautiously optimistic. It was better than he dared hope. Cases like Christina's could go either way. Recovery or a devastating cascade of complications leading to permanent disability or death. It seemed they had managed to interrupt the process just in time. "I'm going to check on their daughter, then grab some coffee," Elijah decided. "Page me if there's any change." The NICU was on the floor below, a hushed space filled with tiny isolettes and the gentle hum of medical equipment. Elijah stopped at the nurse's station to check in. "I'm Dr. Carter. I helped deliver baby Wilson last night and wanted to see how she's doing." The charge nurse smiled. "She's our little star patient. 3 pounds, 4 ounces and breathing on her own. The mayor's with her now." She led Elijah to a corner of the unit where James sat beside an isolette, his large hand reaching through a circular opening to touch his daughter's tiny foot. The baby was small but perfectly formed, with a shock of dark hair and skin a shade lighter than her mother's. Various monitors were attached to her chest and foot, but notably absent was a ventilator, an excellent sign for a premature infant. James looked up as they approached, his face showing signs of exhaustion but also unmistakable joy. "Dr. Carter, come meet Olivia." Elijah stepped closer, peering at the tiny infant. "You named her already?" "Christina and I had chosen it months ago." "Olivia Eleanor Wilson," James smiled softly. "She's strong. The doctors say she's doing remarkably well for her gestational age." "She takes after her mother," Elijah observed. "Speaking of whom, Christina's showing significant improvement this morning." Hope brightened James's tired face. "Really?" The neurologist was cautiously positive, but I was afraid to get my hopes up too much. "Her numbers are moving in the right direction," Elijah confirmed. "It's still early, but I'm optimistic." James stood suddenly and wrapped Elijah in an unexpected hug. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything." Elijah, momentarily startled, patted the mayor's back awkwardly. "Just doing my job," he said, then added more softly, "But you're welcome." After checking the baby's chart and confirming her good progress, Elijah headed to the doctor's lounge for much-needed coffee. The television was on, tuned to a local news channel. To his surprise, his own face appeared on the screen. A photo from the hospital website alongside a headline, "Unknown doctor saves mayor's wife and child." The reporter was speaking outside the hospital. "Emergency delivery of the mayor's daughter. Sources tell us that Dr. Elijah Carter, a relatively new addition to Memorial Hospital's staff, stayed with Mrs. Wilson throughout the night when she was brought in as an unidentified patient. The mayor's office has released a statement expressing profound gratitude to the medical team. Elijah quickly turned away, uncomfortable with the attention. He poured his coffee and was about to leave when Dr. Lee entered the lounge. "There you are," she exclaimed. "I've been trying to reach you. The press is going crazy with this story." Elijah grimaced. "So I see. I don't understand why they're focusing on me." "It was a team effort. Because it's a good story," Dr. Lee said matter-of-factly. "Black doctor works overtime to save the white mayor's wife without even knowing who she is. Human interest gold." Her bluntness made Elijah chuckle despite himself. "Well, I didn't do it for a story. And I still have a patient to look after." "That's why everyone likes you," Dr. Lee said, pouring her own coffee. "No ego, but heads up. The hospital administration is thrilled with the positive publicity. Expect to be asked to do some press." Elijah shook his head. "Not interested. My focus is on medicine, not media." Dr. Lee raised an eyebrow. "Noble, but you might not have a choice. This is the biggest news story to hit Memorial in years. The PR team is already fielding interview requests." Before Elijah could respond, his pager beeped. "It's Christina," he said, checking the display. "She's waking up." They hurried back to the ICU where the respiratory therapist was already assessing Christina. Her eyes were open, and she was clearly fighting against the ventilator, a good sign that her brain function was intact and she was ready to breathe on her own. "Let's extubate," Elijah decided after a quick examination. "She's meeting all the criteria." The respiratory therapist nodded and began preparing for the procedure. A nurse had already paged James, who arrived just as they were removing the breathing tube. Christina coughed weakly as the tube came out, then took her first unassisted breath in nearly 24 hours. "Water," she whispered hoarsely. The nurse offered her ice chips, which she accepted gratefully. Her eyes found James, who had moved to her bedside, then shifted to Elijah. "Dr. Carter," she said, her voice barely audible. "You're still here. Couldn't leave my most famous patient," he joked gently. "How are you feeling?" "Like I've been hit by a truck," she admitted. "The baby?" "She's beautiful," James said, taking her hand. "And doing wonderfully. They named her the little warrior of the NICU." Tears filled Christina's eyes. "I want to see her. Soon," Elijah promised. "Once you're a bit stronger. Maybe tomorrow if your progress continues." Over the next few hours, Christina grew steadily stronger. Her lab values continued to improve and her mental status remained clear. By evening, she was able to sit up in bed and have a short video call with the NICU nurse, who held the phone next to baby Olivia. Throughout the day, Elijah found himself dodging reporters who had somehow gained access to the hospital corridors, despite security's best efforts. The hospital administrator cornered him outside the cafeteria, beaming with barely contained excitement. "Dr. Carter, there you are. I've been looking everywhere for you. The publicity from this case is phenomenal. We've had 3 major networks request interviews, and the mayor's office called to personally thank the hospital. This could mean increased funding, donations." Elijah cut her off politely but firmly. "I'm glad the hospital is benefiting, but I'm not interested in interviews. My focus is on my patients." The administrator's smile faltered slightly. "I understand your dedication, but surely you see the opportunity here? This kind of publicity could advance your career significantly." "My career advances through good medicine, not good press," Elijah replied. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to check on Mrs. Wilson." As he walked away, he could feel her disappointed gaze on his back. He knew he was probably making an enemy, but he couldn't bring himself to care. The circus developing around Christina's case made him deeply uncomfortable. When he returned to the ICU, he found James and Christina talking quietly. They looked up as he entered, and Christina smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her tired face. "Dr. Carter," she said, "my husband has been telling me everything. How you stayed with me all night when I first came in. How you came back for the emergency delivery, how you barely left my side afterward." Her eyes shone with tears. "I don't know how to thank you." Elijah shifted uncomfortably under their grateful gazes. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," James said firmly. "They wouldn't have. And we both know it." There was an awkward pause before James continued. "I understand you're avoiding the press," Elijah sighed. "I'm a doctor, not a celebrity. And patient care should be private, not a media event." Christina and James exchanged a look. "We respect that," Christina said. "And we've instructed our press secretary to emphasize that this was a team effort and to protect your privacy as much as possible." "Thank you," Elijah said, genuinely relieved. But, James added, I hope you'll let me find some way to express our gratitude. Perhaps funding for a research project? I understand you were doing innovative work at your previous hospital. Elijah looked up sharply. How did you know about that? James smiled slightly. I'm the mayor. I have resources. And I was curious about the doctor who saved my family. For the first time in the conversation, Elijah felt a flicker of interest. His research on preventing preeclampsia in high-risk populations had been shelved when the head of his department at University Cal Center had deemed it not commercially viable enough to justify the resources. It was part of why he'd left. It's an interesting offer, he admitted, but I'd need to think about it. Of course, James nodded. There's no rush. Focus on getting Christina fully recovered first. As if on cue, Christina yawned widely, her eyelids drooping. I think that's my signal to let you rest, Elijah said, checking her vital signs one last time. Everything looks good. If this progress continues, we can move you to a regular room tomorrow and arrange a proper visit with Olivia. Christina smiled sleepily. Thank you, Dr. Carter, for everything. As Elijah left the ICU, he felt the weight of the past 2 days finally catching up with him. He was beyond exhausted, but there was also a deep satisfaction that could only come from a case where everything had gone right. Despite the odds, he had no interest in the publicity or in being known as the doctor who saved the mayor's wife. But the possibility of reviving his research, that was something worth considering. Perhaps some good might come from this unexpected connection after all. 3 months had passed since the night Christina Wilson was rushed into Memorial Hospital. The summer heat had given way to autumn crispness, and the media frenzy around the mayor's wife and her dramatic delivery had finally died down. Elijah sat in his small office, reviewing patient files. The stack of folders was interrupted by a thick research proposal, the third draft of his preeclampsia prevention study. After weeks of working nights and weekends, he finally felt it was ready to present to the hospital board. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. He looked up to see Nurse Tanya leaning in the doorway. Your 4 o'clock is here, she said. And she brought a special guest? Elijah smiled, knowing exactly who it was. Send them in. Christina entered looking remarkably different from the last time he'd seen her in the hospital. Her face had regained its healthy glow, and she moved with confidence, no trace of the fragility that had marked her recovery. In her arms was a bundle wrapped in a pale yellow blanket. Dr. Carter, she greeted him warmly. I hope we're not interrupting anything important. Not at all, he said, standing to welcome her. And please call me Elijah. I think we're well past formalities, Christina smiled. Elijah, then. I wanted to bring someone to meet you properly. She pulled back the blanket to reveal baby Olivia's face. The infant had grown considerably in the past 3 months, her once tiny features now plump and her dark eyes alert as they took in the new surroundings. May I? Elijah asked, holding out his arms. Christina carefully transferred Olivia to him. The baby studied his face curiously before breaking into a toothless grin that made his heart melt. She's thriving, he observed, noting her healthy weight and clear eyes. The NICU team did a wonderful job. They did, Christina agreed, taking a seat. But I wanted to thank you again. The neonatologist said if you hadn't recognized the preeclampsia so quickly that first night, things could have gone very differently for both of us. Elijah gently rocked Olivia as he sat back down. You were the one doing all the hard work. I just provided some medical guidance. Always so modest, Christina said with a knowing smile. How's the research proposal coming along? James mentioned you've been working on it. It's ready, Elijah admitted, but getting it approved is another matter. Even with the mayor's support, medical research is a slow process. Christina's expression turned serious. That's actually why I'm here. James wanted to come himself, but he's tied up in budget meetings. He asked me to invite you to dinner at our home this weekend. There are some people he wants you to meet, potential donors for your research. Elijah raised his eyebrows in surprise. When James had first mentioned supporting his research, Elijah had assumed it was just talk, the kind of promise people make in moments of gratitude but rarely follow through on. Yet over the past months, the mayor had proven surprisingly sincere, checking in regularly on the proposal's progress. That's very generous of him, Elijah said carefully. Christina seemed to sense his hesitation. This isn't about repaying a debt, Elijah. James and I have become genuinely interested in your work. The statistics on maternal mortality, especially among women of color, are shameful for a city of our size and resources. Your research could make a real difference." She reached out and touched his arm. "And it's not just because of what you did for us." James did his homework. He spoke with your colleagues from University Medical Center. They all said the same thing, that your approach to preventive care was years ahead of its time, and that the department head who shelved your research did so for political reasons, not scientific ones. Elijah sat back, surprised at how thoroughly the mayor had investigated his background. He felt a mix of vindication and discomfort, pleased that his former colleagues had supported his work but uneasy about the mayor digging into his past. "So what exactly are you proposing?" he asked. "A public-private partnership," Christina explained. "City funding matched by private donations to establish a maternal health research center here at Memorial, with your preeclampsia study as its first major project." Olivia began to fuss, and Elijah handed her back to Christina, who expertly settled the baby against her shoulder. The domestic ease of the gesture struck him. This confident, healthy woman was a far cry from the critically ill patient he'd treated that night. "It sounds too good to be true," he admitted. Christina laughed. "That's exactly what the hospital administrator said when James proposed it. But there's a catch, isn't there always? You'd have to serve as the center's director," she said, "which means less time in the emergency room and more time managing research and speaking at fundraisers. More visibility than I know you're comfortable with." Elijah frowned. The idea of stepping away from direct patient care gave him pause. He'd become a doctor to help people, not to manage budgets and schmooze with donors. "I need to think about it," he said finally. Christina nodded. "Of course. But come to dinner anyway. Saturday at 7. No pressure, just food and conversation." After she left, Elijah sat at his desk for a long time, his mind racing. The opportunity was extraordinary, the kind most medical researchers dream about. But it would fundamentally change the nature of his work. The week passed quickly, and Saturday evening found Elijah standing at the doorstep of the mayor's residence, a bottle of wine in hand. He'd accepted the invitation but remained undecided about the offer. The mayor's home was large but less ostentatious than he'd expected, a historic brick house with a well-maintained garden. James himself answered the door, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater. "Elijah, come in," he said warmly, accepting the wine. "Christina's just putting Olivia down for the night. Let me introduce you to our other guests." In the living room, 3 people rose to greet him. James made the introductions: the head of a local charitable foundation, the chief of obstetrics from University Hospital across town, and a city council member who chaired the public health committee. The conversation over dinner was lively and substantive, focusing on maternal health disparities and preventive care strategies. Elijah found himself drawn in despite his initial reservations, impressed by the genuine interest and knowledge the others showed in his field. "The statistics don't lie," the council member said at one point. "Our city's maternal mortality rate for Black and Hispanic women is 3 times higher than for white women. It's a crisis that deserves our attention and resources. And your research addresses one of the leading causes of these deaths," added the foundation director. "Preeclampsia doesn't have to be the killer it currently is." As dessert was served, James finally brought up the proposal directly. "So, Elijah, what do you think? Are you interested in leading this center?" All eyes turned to him. Elijah took a deep breath, suddenly aware that his answer would significantly impact not just his own career, but potentially the health outcomes of countless women. "I became a doctor to help people," he said slowly, "to make a difference one patient at a time. The idea of stepping back from direct care is difficult for me." James nodded, understanding. "That's precisely why you're the right person for this. You won't lose sight of the individual patients in pursuit of statistical success. And you wouldn't have to give up clinical work entirely," the obstetrics chief added. "Most research directors still maintain a limited practice. It keeps them grounded in the realities of patient care." Christina, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. "When I was brought into the emergency room that night, I was just another patient to you. Not the mayor's wife, not a VIP, just a woman and her baby in trouble. That's the perspective this center needs." Her words struck home. Elijah realized that while he might help dozens of patients personally in the ER, This center could potentially help thousands by changing treatment protocols and prevention strategies. All right, he said finally. I'm in. But I have conditions, James smiled. Name them. The center focuses on practical interventions, not just academic research. We develop protocols that can be implemented in any hospital, not just those with abundant resources. And we train providers who work in underserved communities. Done, James agreed without hesitation. Anything else? I maintain some clinical hours. And I won't be trotted out as a publicity tool or political prop. James laughed. Fair enough, though I can't promise.